Someone once said that the thinnest of lines divide us the most. And nowhere is that more true than in the lines that are drawn to form political districts, whether
after each reapportionment,
or the state legislature or your school district. Now, congressional districts, you may remember from civics, get redrawn every 10 years after the census, and 2011 is that year. Democrats are already worried that if Republicans do as well as predicted in November in state elections, they'll be in a position to influence the redrawing of the districts. That's called gerrymandering, and it's been around about as long as we've been a nation. Jeff Reichert directed a documentary on that, which focuses on the unfair and the advantageous side of the practice. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much.
And Jerry, what exactly about gerrymandering, which is not new, keeps it still sort of a secret and under the radar?
Well, I think it's the fact that it happens most often in the sort of proverbial smoke-filled rooms behind closed doors. This is a process that's controlled by legislatures and done in such a way to advantage the interests of those legislatures. So it's not really about providing the best representation for the public anymore. It's really about preserving incumbency and preserving politicians' hold on power.
What about the fact that politicians do it, including, for example, the current president, who did it when he was a state legislator?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we show in the film how Barack Obama was involved in redrawing a district for himself in 2001. And, you know, we do that not to make Barack Obama a villain, but to show that the system is really something that's broken. And it's sort of, you know, you're kind of inviting all these politicians into a room and saying, well, here are the keys to your political power, but don't start the engine. You know, I think we'd be hard pressed if we were put in similar kinds of circumstances to not act on that impulse, to not try and preserve our jobs.
Well, first of all, I called you Jerry, and it's Jeff, and I apologize for that.
That's
so
okay.
You're Jeff Reichert, and you've directed this documentary, which we're seeing bits of on the screen, called Gerrymandering. Why'd you make it?
I made it because it seemed like that it's so fascinating. There's this kind of fundamental invisible power structure that underlies everything we do as a democracy. You know, you live in a district, I live in a district, everybody who's watching this show lives in a district, and all of those districts are drawn by someone, usually not with the constituents of that district's best interests at heart. And that seemed to me something that Americans should really know about and should really be a participant of, rather than just sort of this, you know, these kind of like chits on a game board to be moved around at the whim of politicians.
But it benefits or hurts each party depending upon who's in power.
Sure.
Could you argue that in the end it all works out?
Yeah, I mean, but do we have a democracy just so that way the parties can work it out amongst themselves? That's not what we're here for. You know, we didn't set this whole thing up so that way the Democrats and the Republicans could just achieve parity nationwide in who controls which redistricting processes. The idea is that voters would choose the representation that they want, and we would fight it out in elections, and sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. In this case, it's really, you know, the politicians always win, and the voters always lose.
So you chose as an example for this film the fight over Proposition 11 in California, which was to end redistricting by legislators.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it seemed like an interesting story. You know, our heroes in the film are they're an immigrant and a child of immigrants. One of them is very famous. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, immigrant, came to this country, you know, liked the idea of the democracy that we had here. Did pretty well for himself. And Kathy Fung from California Common Cause, who her parents moved to this country to be a participant in this democracy. And I like the idea that, you know, these kinds of folks are they're kind of the mythology of America. These people coming here to participate saw a problem within the system, and it's a very weird problem. People don't really pay attention to redistricting. They saw this problem and decided we're going to try and come together and make a change, and they were successful.
Well, the Democrats, of course, in the California legislature fought very hard against it.
Sure, I mean, they don't want to give up their control over the levers of power, and which, you know, it's understandable in some ways, and they're still continuing that fight in this redistricting round, trying to undo the work that was done when the voters passed Proposition 11. And so this is a hard fight. You know, nobody wants to give up and sort of unilaterally disarm in a certain state and say, okay, we're going to do fair redistricting here. But, you know, if the Democrats do that in California, what are the Republicans going to do to us in Texas and Florida and Michigan? So it's a very tough issue.
So where does it go? I mean, it's in the courts. Can it take effect based on the census of 2010?
Well, so what is on the ballot in California right now, essentially, is that Prop 11 is passed, and so there's a commission to cover state legislative districts. There's now Proposition 20, which would extend the jurisdiction of that commission to cover congressional districts. There's also Prop 27, which is sponsored by many folks in the Democratic Party, whose policies I actually like a lot. But it would disband the commission, the Prop 11 commission, before it even starts. And so there is a potential that we may never, the redistricting reform in California may actually not happen, depending on what happens at the polls in November.
Well, as one of the people who was in your documentary, Bill Cavalla, says in the documentary, when you draw a district, it's going to help one party and harm the other. There's just no way around that.
Sure, and I think we can argue endlessly about the results of a particular plan, but I think that kind of misses the point. If the process that we go through to achieve that plan is inherently unfair, that's where we should be focusing our attention. And I think there's a real conflict of interest in legislators drawing themselves districts, whether for to maintain the office that they have, or to maintain or to set themselves up for a future office. That's not, again, it's not what we have a democracy for. It's not so that the legislators can pick voters. It's so voters can pick legislators.
Jeff Reichert, where can we see your film?
It's going to be in theaters across the country starting October 15th, and we're going to be rolling it out nationwide through the fall.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.